Okay, for people joining this live stream, it is the first of 3 that we are doing today. This one is on the subject of question objects and assessment functions for things like educational quizzes and such. All right, let's start off with the guide page here. So what am I looking at here? Am I just...
Yeah, it's a notebook. I didn't want to commit it because I thought the name and stuff might change. So it's just in a cloud object.
Okay. All right, so let's get a sense of what's here. So question object. So I mean, these things will mostly live in form notebooks, yes?
I think so, yes.
Q&A form notebook, which has yet to be implemented.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so far in the roadmap, we've discussed having 2 different types of form notebook and Q&A form notebook. Form notebook having insertion of form object, and Q&A form notebook having an insertion of question object. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Okay. So, but I'm not sure I think we should be able to mix and match those things, right?
You're right.
Why not?
You're
I mean,
right.
So in other words, every cell in a form notebook that allows the possibility of input. So if I go here, programmatic notebook, form authoring notebook, what you're saying is, what happens if I expand this?
I think the configuration menu, or whatever we call the gear, is going to be a lot different. And that's the main reason we want 2 different things.
Yeah, but
yeah.
Okay. Well, but I don't understand. If you want to mix and match them, if certain fields, like fill in your name, okay, that's not an assessed question.
True.
Right? So I think we're going to need, look, here, when we have, I mean, it says form element, great, editable notebook area. So why isn't there a question element?
Well, I think question objects will be able to not have an assessment. So you don't necessarily need to do that. And then it's very similar to form objects.
We have a UX design process going on for form notebook right now. So I'll make sure that this is included in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this, what would this look like for a question object? I don't think it looks that different, does it?
Well, you have to have the assessment function, which we need to allow arbitrary complexity for.
I understand that, but that's just another one of these fields that is a code-like field.
Yes.
Like these are code-like fields.
Most of the time, yes. Most of the time, you will be forced to have at least some code to define the assessment.
That is the idea, that it wouldn't look too much different.
Right, and maybe there's a way of selecting some common assessments that are just named.
Yep.
So I think it will be pretty much the same, and I think we should allow mixing and matching, and I think it becomes a, okay, so it's a form element, and then it's maybe it's a, question element is the other thing.
Yeah, I think allowing mixing and matching makes sense, but I think the quiz writing is a common enough and custom enough use case that it's worth having a entirely.
Well, sure, but right, but it's going to need free-form fields like what is your name and so on.
Oh yes.
But it's not obvious to me that it's any different, right? In other words, the thing is going to return what would normally be just the unprocessed or possibly interpreted form field return will now be processed by the assessment function, right? That's really the only difference.
You mean after the end user hits the submit button?
That's correct.
Yes, that's the main difference.
Right. So, I mean, running it through an assessment function, it's just like the form element just has an identity assessment function, and the question element has a non-identity assessment function, and that doesn't seem problematic to me.
Right. Conceptually, I think that makes sense.
Fine. So, and I think all the rest of this flow is pretty much the same. So really what it is, it's and by the way, one might want to pick up the raw things that people typed in, which I guess can come through the assessment function. I think that's part of the association for the assessment function, right? But the main point is that you're auto-running a function, a specialized function on each field, which is the assessment function.
Yes.
And that's really whereas here in the standard, form case, you're pretty much, you're running an interpreter, but nothing else. Am I making sense?
Right.
Okay. So I think it should just be folded into the same story.
Right. And yeah, so I mean, in the form notebook, one of the major things is you have to tell people, you have to specify what happens when somebody hits submit. Do you just display it in another notebook? Do you put it somewhere? For the question and answer one, typically that will be predefined, right? It'll assess it and reinsert markup. It'll mark up the user's notebook. Right.
I'm sorry. Say it again. I lost concentration.
Typically, the action that happens when it's submitted is predefined in the question and answer case.
Yes.
It's assessed and the notebook's marked up. That's what happens. You don't need to worry. Say, do we create a whole nother notebook?
I see what you're saying. So in other words, what you're saying is, in these actions here, where you say, well, let's see, submission button action here. So one of those actions is mark up. Use the assessment functions to mark up the notebook.
Right. That's the default. That'll be the default. And
fine. I mean,
we should communicate strongly, not that most people don't want to mess with it.
I understand that. I understand. So but your concept is that there's a Q&A notebook that is different from a form notebook that has that as the default action. But in a form notebook, you could still have that as the action.
Well, I think most of the fields in the form notebook wouldn't have any built-in way to know how to mark themselves up.
I know, but that's very simple. They mark themselves up by doing nothing. What is your name? Whatever. Just comes back as your name.
And then it can be on the one of the bottom choices here, because it's usually going to be not very good.
Well, right. It's only good if you have a lot of assessment function stuff in it.
Right.
Okay. All right. So that's a unified thing, and we're just providing a Q&A notebook interface where pretty much this would not be, we would not mostly have interpreters for the other fields. We would just have free-form input fields, right? And I mean, what happens when you have an assessment function that's running on a chunk of notebook? Do we have that?
We have a plan. We haven't implemented it, but we have a plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's in principle possible.
The answer comparison methods to be able to take basically anything. So far, we started with the easy common stuff.
So you can write it. So for example,
but cells could be a comparison method, or notebooks entirely.
No, I understand that. But I mean, we could have something where the main assessment thing, where it's like you're supposed to write a computational essay and it will use some heuristics to grade your computational essay, and it will give you points off if you have for loops and things.
Yeah, that's certainly in the realm of possibilities. It seems like sort of on the horizon of things we want to approach.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's take a look. Okay. So we're looking. Okay. Question object, we understand. Assessment function is part of question object. Assessment result object is the thing that comes back after the processing of that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So all updates documented in CBS. Okay. Well, so what am I supposed to see here?
The assessment function, there's updates in the assessment function doc page if you want to review them. It's not major in assessment function.
Sorry?
The updates are not major changes to assessment function.
Okay, so what should I be?
What the main one is cloud object. So you can have assessment function of cloud object, which represents a deployed assessment function.
Boy, this is a complicated creature.
Right. So yeah.
Do the users get exposed to this complexity, or is it mostly in pull downs?
I mean, I think most of this, assessment function, they can dive in as much as want. If they want a complex assessment, then they'll probably have to learn this stuff, and they'll type an assessment function into the.
Right, but normally, do we have the UI yet for building a question object? Right, because that's what we want to be able to do. is that all these things, like it's a geoposition, it's a data object, and so on, that should all be something that can be done from the GUI.
Right. We don't have the authoring GUI for these made yet.
But it will presumably follow the principles of the form notebook authoring GUI, yes?
Schroeder, is that right?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Who's
the
saying
roadmap,
yes?
and that's what we can bring
Okay.
to the next meeting.
Okay, fine. All right. Okay. So should I be looking at question object here?
Yeah. So question object is new.
Oh yeah, that's right. Assessment function is actually in 12.2.
Assessment function is in 12.2, but it wasn't very exciting, so we didn't really talk a lot about it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Question object represents the question, the corresponding assessment. Okay. But so now the question, is there an example here?
Right. So we have this convenience where you can have a test function as a second argument instead of a full assessment function. And it'll kind of build the assessment function automatically for you.
Okay.
So between, there's the operator form of between.
So wait a minute. So this is, okay. I mean, I don't understand how can it know. Okay, so the usual thing is that there is a piece of styled text at the beginning, and then this is something that will be inserted in the notebook with this form, and this is a style, and there'll presumably be a bunch of styles for these things, right?
Right, right. So this is the input field style, right? And you see in the next one, you didn't specify the style directly, but it's inferred from the assessment function.
Wait a minute. What? Oh, I see. Here, we didn't specify the style here either.
Right. The input field is the default.
Okay. Okay. Fine. I see. And the second one, if that had been if those had been geo positions, what would it have done? We don't know. It might have a map or something.
Exactly. Right. Right. It might be clickable or, yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of choices to be made, and it's not obvious, but you can always override it.
Okay. Question object prompt. Order U.S. presidents by inauguration date. Question interface. Multiple choice grid. Why is this not an sub-association, the question interface?
Well, the first element is not a rule. It's just it's kind of like when we do sub options, and like a method sub option. It's that sort of thing.
Blah.
Yeah, we also have the idea of a question interface object that would be a cleaner,
I think that would be
syntax.
A better,
yeah, and we want it. Yeah, it should be pretty easy to implement it on top of this. But
so the question interface object is defining.
So then in
of this is so I'm trying to understand, how is this related to, how is this related to our general user interface objects? Do you understand what I'm asking?
No, I don't know what's a general.
Well, so what I'm talking about is, let's say you're building a manipulate and you want the same kind of grid in a manipulate. How would you do it?
Well, we want to make all of these specifications available in the form world as well.
Well, then we shouldn't call it question. I mean, we should call it just some other kind of interface. I mean, it's more like an interface object. Well, what is it? I mean, it's an interface object where the goal is to get, just like a slider delivers a single number, right? Mm. We should get somebody from the front end team involved in this, because this seems like it's a generalization of radio button, whatever they are, all the radio button functions and things like that. But it's a different form of it. It's a form where, like, if we had a slider here, what would it look like?
I think there's an example with slider somewhere. Is it further up? Schroeder, we made this yesterday, right? Didn't we put slider towards the top? Oh yeah, right. It was, the output's not evaluated.
Can I evaluate it?
Yeah, it should. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a mess, if I might say so. I mean, what we've got here is something that is essentially a copy of manipulate controls or general user interface controls, but presented in a different form. Like this object, you see what I'm saying? This thing.
One of the things that led us down this route that we were trying to achieve is that very often some of these sub-option values can be inferred from the answer at the assessment object. So it might be sufficient simply to say slider, and then it can figure out for itself what the range is, or in things like the previous case with the categories and the choices, those are all things that are available in the assessment function. So we don't want to say stuff twice. So the idea is that in simpler cases, you might just be enough to say slider.
That's fine. That's fine. But so is it in the case of, I mean, you know, that's exactly the same thing in a form object, right? You can say the controller type, right, in a form object. Who knows how that works?
Yeah, I've done that before.
Right? So we need to unify this with whatever's happening there, right? Because whatever we're doing here should just work in form objects and vice versa.
I've always found the form object syntax for those things difficult to use.
Well, fine. Then let's invent something that we can, you know, have some more of an object that we can put into both places. Okay, so.
Right, which, yeah, so maybe just what we have makes sense, but the name shouldn't have question in it.
I don't know whether it makes sense. You need to have something that is more unified with the way that this works in forms. Okay, so go figure out how it works in forms and go come up with something which is some symbolic wrapper that represents this whole interface construct.
Right,
So
I think that's what we have planned for question interface, but the name is probably not generic enough.
I'm saying, yeah, right.
And we can do that, and we can reference both Ricardo and somebody from the front end team on the design before coming back to you.
Fine. But then I would suggest that this is more like a form interface. That's more like what this is about. But I'm not sure exactly what the, you know, I'm not sure. So go figure that out. I don't know. Okay. So change to partially specified keys. Okay. We have a few comments on our live stream here from Ethan asking for levels of successive hints. I don't know whether we have that. What is our hinting mechanism at this point? You know, give me another hint. How do we do that?
Yeah, we don't have a successive hints.
We have
Currently
a single
implemented,
hint.
but it is on the roadmap because that's one thing from the question framework in CBM that we want to bring into this, where it has a carousel of hints.
Okay, fine.
And
how do the
syntax
hints
was
work
just
anyway?
I mean, the hints would go in there just like ranges in the example that you're looking at right now. Yeah,
I see.
You would specify.
So the only question is a hint sequence,
right.
And any dependency of, you know, one could imagine something where the hints depend on what actual things people had tried entering. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yep.
But I think the most minimal thing is just give me one hint.
Right.
And then there's a hint sequence. But the hint sequence in general can depend on, you know, functions that are applied to what's already been entered. So question for me.
Well, it's basically, it feels like there's three choices here. There's a list which is sequential hints. There's one which is just a list of one hint, and then there's a function which would
which would
generate
eat what
hints.
Would take what you've entered and generate a hint from it. Hint function.
Yeah.
Hint sequence. Hint sequence, hint function.
Well, do they need to be different things, or is it just a case of if the right-hand side is a function, it's
we also have explanation, which is dependent.
That's different
on what the user puts in, right? It's returned by the assessment.
I know, but that's after the fact. That's after you press. Well, I see.
Right, but if you're saying that a hint that depends on what the user's done, that might be the same thing as an explanation.
Well, no, but it would not be, because there's a button that says "Give me a hint," right? If you specify a hint, look, there's two cases. There's hint preemptively when the user presses "Give me a hint." I don't know what to do, and there's hint after they give a wrong answer. Those are two different cases.
Right.
which I don't know.
The design of having both of them on one thing is up in the air, certainly.
You might, with hints as well, is one of the few things like where you might want to take stuff from outside of the question. If you've got
What
a
do you mean?
sequence of questions and you get 1, 2, and 3 wrong.
Oh boy, that's adaptive learning, and that's fairly complicated, right? I mean,
Yeah, and I think then that starts becoming linked to actually changing the question that you get next, which is stuff that we punted from these
Yeah.
early designs.
right.
it's
Let's not
a
do
way
that
off.
right now.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Question from Ethan: how will deploying timed questions securely work? I think we have. I mean, the secure deployment will work because all the stuff is on the server, right?
Right. So we have this question deploy function that's also on the agenda that will, and that'll be what's basically powering at least part of the gear menu on the Q&A form notebook. I figured from there or another menu next to it, we'll have a deployment mechanism where
Okay. But the timing mechanism we've also thought about, right?
yeah. So that, I mean, when you, it should be pinging the server.
Well, also,
Yeah.
but it also just has a timestamp, and then it can have an entry timestamp and exit timestamp.
Right. But in order to not fake it, you need to touch the server when you start and when you submit.
Right. Well, for extra luxury features, we can send the data to our blockchain.
That's, yeah.
Just to, it's trivial to do that. It's just blockchain right.
Right. If we wanted a world where independent verification is needed, I think.
Okay. Also, Ethan is saying a loud number of guesses. Do we have that?
So there's this disable reassessment, which might be the wrong name, as an option that we're proposing to add to a number of these functions.
Well, I mean, but I think we just want a max tries or something, or max submissions.
Yeah, that's the same thing, just a better name.
Okay. And it can default to 1.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure if the default should be 1 or infinity.
Okay. Well, probably depends. That's probably one of the things that would be set.
Yes.
I mean, look, I think what we need to do is there are known scenarios like, a final exam, a kind of a history taking for medical stuff, a this or that or the other, right? And, I think each one of these, we need some kind of description, which is, I guess, part of the point is to make a somewhat generic description and then put in our selector, e.g. final exam or something, e.g. test your knowledge quiz. I don't know the names of all these educational concepts. I'm sure there are things where there's, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. And it'd be nice to have fully built examples of them too that are available.
Right. Nick is suggesting the very amusing idea of encrypted objects with question objects as captures. That's an amusing idea. In other words,
yeah,
that's an amusing idea. I mean, the other thing with these is, another case is a survey. Well, I guess that's not an assessment thing. That's just a form notebook.
That's usually just can be a form notebook, right?
Right. Okay. All right, let's keep going here. Assessment result object.
Right. So this was in 12.3. It's not something people write themselves. It just comes back to them. And the main change that we were adding for 12.3 is that a single assessment result object can contain multiple assessments. So you can nest them and it's sort of a single object, which is what we need for deployment.
Okay. I don't fully understand that, but maybe I will.
Right. So, I mean, there are two use cases. You can imagine deploying a single question to a cloud object, and it's pretty simple. But you can imagine deploying a whole quiz to a cloud object.
Yes.
To a single. And so what does the cloud object return when it's a whole quiz? It still returns the assessment result object, but instead of being 1 level deep, it's 2 levels deep.
Okay. Why wouldn't it be 3 or 4? I mean, I don't understand what.
I mean, it can be arbitrarily deep, but basically, instead of just containing, you said 3, the answer was 4. Here's why you're wrong. It contains a list of those.
But I don't understand how it would get more nested. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, is it the case that in a form notebook, you're either describing the result of a single form notebook. Okay, you're describing the result of a single question in a single form notebook, or you're describing the result of a bunch of questions in a single form notebook. How do you get to do something more nested?
Yeah, I don't really have a use case that would be more nested, but the implementation in the code allows for arbitrary nesting. But I think in the normal use scenario, it's either going to be 0 or 1, or 1 or 2, however you want to say it.
I mean, depending on how you do it, you could have your whole course, right? You could have something where there's this section of the exam, and it's this, and it's this question within this section within this whole,
I just hate to be the student who has to submit their whole exam, their whole course with a single button click.
Whatever. the whole
you do get exams that have sections though. You get must answer 3 questions out of section B and all questions out of section A.
Sure, that's a reasonable scenario. But
look, this whole business about teaching humans to act like computers is just absolutely bonkers. Yeah. And it's I mean, we're doing it more and more in the world today. It really it's like all these things where unless you put these words, your Twitter account will be banned, or unless you have your English, your essay that's supposed to be an exposition for about something, unless it contains these grammatical structures and these words, you won't get a good score. It's like, okay, fine. Well, anyway, but let me not. We're just building technology. Okay. What should I be looking at here? Should I be looking at question object or not?
We just did.
Looking at
okay.
We
just did.
But we didn't go through any of these details here.
We did not.
Right. Suggest supported interface types. Okay. So this is where we would have the geo selector, for example.
Yes.
Okay.
And we want each of these to have their own documentation page, which will be pretty small.
So you're going to have a list of what are we going to have? It's a listing of question object types.
If you scroll down on the agenda, there is a section for this. And I wanted to ask if it's too early to choose the URI for these.
I don't think so.
Okay, if you can choose
if
that.
Worst case, we can change it. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
Question object type, I would say.
Well, we were saying maybe it won't have the word question in it if this is a form interface type. Right.
Say that again.
Wait, I mean, one of the first things we said in this meeting is the term question interface might be too specific. Maybe we need to rename it form interface or something.
Yes, fair enough. All right, fair enough. But again, you've got to merge it with the existing UI controls, which, All right, so that's a project for you guys to straighten out.
Okay, yeah.
But as soon as you have it straightened out, form interface type or whatever, I mean, look, if we have to change the URI, so be it.
That's fine. Okay.
Okay, let's move on. Question deploy.
Right. So this could go in system or it could work under the hood. I want your
could work on
that.
what?
Or it could just be an internal symbol that's
what does it
part
do?
Of the implementation. So it's like cloud deploy for a question object, but instead of returning a cloud object, it returns the sanitized question object. So instead of having an answer key in the object,
okay. So listen.
It has a cloud
this
object.
Is similar to what happens with mail receiver, right? Which returns a fake cloud object, which I've never liked.
I don't like it either. No, right. But yeah. So yeah, I'm trying to avoid.
Okay, but then like what we had a design for something which is a proxied cloud object, right? In the case of the mail receiver, what's happening is we have a cloud object, which is the anchor point for the mail receiver. Right. So for example, it's the thing that manages the mail receiver. The mail receiver itself is deployed in some kind of mail system somewhere, but the cloud object is its anchor point. And if you delete the anchor point, it knows to go and delete the actual, mail insertion. So can we go through what the question object thing, what this question deploy actually does?
Yeah, so what it actually does is it takes the assessment function and it deploys it to a cloud object as a URL dispatcher, actually, where one of the endpoints is an API function that does the assessment. The other is an info endpoint that just tells about the assessment function.
All right, so this is analogous to what happens with the mail receiver function.
Well, no, because the reason we're not using cloud deploy, and the important point is that what it gives back is not the cloud object. What it gives back is the modified question object that in place of the assessment function that has the key hard coded into it, so anyone who inspects it can find the answer, it has the cloud object.
So in other words, but it's also a permissions game, right? Because somebody has the ability to get the full cloud object with its key.
Yes,
it's
whoever deploys
the person.
Yeah.
Right, but so what happens is this is two permissions. There's a permission for the full deployed object, and there's a permission. Okay, so what this says is
it's read versus execute, right? What you can use all the cloud deploy options. Yeah.
Right. So what it's doing is it's setting the permissions thing to be owner gets read write, and other people in the class or whatever get execute, and the rest of the world gets nothing or whatever it is.
Right.
Is that correct?
Well, I mean, that's how the permissions object, whoever you set to have read access can see the answer key and import the whole thing. Whoever you set to have execute can take the quiz, right? Right.
Now,
we didn't override the default dollar permissions or anything like that.
One question here is the longer term aspiration for the level of security this should provide, because I'm seeing this as intermediate security, that the answers aren't there in the notebook for somebody just to do show expression on, but it is not for high stakes.
Why?
Because you need the reason is that for high stakes, we're going to need quite a lot more machinery on the server side, such as we'll only accept one submission. We'll only accept submissions between 9 in the morning and midday on this date and things like that. So you can't write yourself a little program to spam it with answers until you hit the right answer.
Well, hold on. So the main issue there is that
it needs to hold state, basically. So it needs to know you've already had a go and to know that that's it.
That's a separate piece of equipment, so to speak. I mean, because that has to do with, so here's the thing that this isn't, right? So our cloud object permission system just says, can you read it? Doesn't say, oh, you can only read it once between this time and this time. Now, we do have our enhanced cloud permission system, which I think has been largely implemented, if not completely, which has things like only from this geolocation, only between these times of day, and so on. So we have that.
Yeah.
The one
so
thing
that would take care of the timed exam where you have to do it at the right hours, but this count thing would require maintaining a state about
this is a read once type thing. How many times can this user read it? That happens to be a permissions case we have not considered, but I don't think there's any reason we couldn't have that. In other words, the metadata database for the cloud can perfectly well store the number of accesses for that particular user. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's something that it's a different group that needs to deal with that. That's the Joel Klein and the cloud objects team. Okay, but I think the main message for them is that we want a read once permission.
Okay.
Right, for a given user. It's like it just hasn't come up before, but there's no reason we can't have that. I don't think we need read twice. Do you agree? Implementation, I think it's considerably easier to do read once, and I think it's incomprehensible for people to say read n times. Well, what the hell? Let's see whether we can do it.
We need an easy reset tool.
Yeah, that's the question that comes to my mind as well. What happens if you screw up and you beg to your teacher and they say, okay, have another go?
Yeah,
how do they reset it?
The admin needs to be able to reset
it by going into the permission system, and you just reset. I see what you have to do. So what you have to do is
wipe the flag that says that user X has seen
this.
this.
The admin needs to do set permissions on cloud object of user 1 goes to read once again.
Yeah, the problem is that but the issue is, and read once will just be something, yeah, right. They probably that would be the way you would reset it.
And also, it, you know, in terms of how you set it up, you might not be saying user X is allowed to read this once. You might be saying class X, which is a user permissions group, can read once, which has to then expand out to all of the members.
I see.
And
But
what happens if
then
add
you
or
could do
remove
an
members?
individual for the reset. You would just do an individual reset of that particular user to read once. Anyway, this is something for that group to deal with.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay, so then we're talking about how to deploy this thing, which is going to come back with only a piece. I mean, this is really more similar to mail receiver than I think you're giving it credit for, because I see what you need is the consumer part of this has to come back.
Right.
Actually, you need both parts. You need two parts coming back. You need essentially a consumer interface. You know, what should come back maybe is something like some of the cryptography functions, or some of, you know, it's basically this pair, the consumer interface, you know, the public interface and the private interface.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I see. Yep.
So,
yeah, because
I mean,
it's useful to have the cloud object as well. And the other part of this that is also important about when it comes back, it doesn't just remove the key and insert the cloud object. It also, if there's interface information that is inferred from the assessment function, it extracts that and puts it back into the return cloud object correctly. So if you need to know what are the multiple choice questions, and if it was in the notebook, it would just infer them from the assessment function. Now the assessment function is gone. You can't look into it. So we need to extract that information and move it into the question interface specification.
Okay, so I've got a question. If you cloud deploy a form notebook, a form authoring notebook, okay, what are you getting back? Don't you have the same issue there, that you want both the consumer form and the authoring form to be part of the cloud deployment? Do you see what I'm saying? I think it's the same issue, and I think we should solve it in the same way. That is, that we have some kind of, it's not quite form deploy, but it's some kind of you know, some kind of doubled cloud deploy. Okay, maybe it's a maybe it's a an option or a second argument to cloud deploy. Well, that's at the URI. I don't know. It's probably a new function. Okay, that essentially returns, and this would solve the mail receiver problem too. Okay, it would return multiple things in an association where you could pick out, oh, I just want the mailing address, or I just want the cloud object proxy. Okay, and I think I had a design for this, and if we can look for that, that will be good.
Okay.
Brady, I mean, it just maybe.
Was it in the context of mail receiver function?
It was. It was in the context of, okay, what it is. Okay, it was in the context of service deploy, which mail receiver function is an example of.
Okay.
Okay, and I claim that this is also an example of that. So service deploy is something where you are, let's say you want to put a Twitter bot out there. Okay, you are service deploying it because although it may have a cloud object that is its anchor, the ultimate service is deployed somewhere else.
I understand what you mean. Yeah, there's definitely parallels to mail receiver function and service deploy. I understand what you're saying. Where you want to return this public and private pair. Yeah. In mail receiver function, the public thing is just an email address.
Exactly.
So hacking it into the cloud object wasn't so terrible. In this case, it's a complex computable expression. So you're not going to do it. You're not going to hack it.
Right, but hacking it into the cloud object is a hack.
It is, yes, but it was a hack that kind of sort of worked in that case because there's a clickable link and you could just use, but in this case, that's never going to work.
So maybe what we want to do is have service deploy be the general function that does these things. Since you're deploying a question response service, you're deploying a mail receiver service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and service deploy then always returns an association. That would be my first take on this. Okay. And I believe there was
Is
another
service
example.
deploy coming in 12.3? Is that
Well, service deploy has been discussed,
okay?
and I'm trying to remember what service deploy has.
Is that something Christian's group is making?
Oh boy, what's this? Service deploy, service object. What the heck is this? This an action schedule? This is a different thing.
Oh, this is to like retrieve all the tweets about hot dogs once an hour. You know, like
Yeah, this
a, like a
isn't right.
task sort of thing.
Yeah, this is a different thing. So maybe, oh, no. You know what this is used for? This is used in the Bloomberg link.
Yeah, financial data. Yeah.
Right. So maybe we need something other than service deploy. We need something which is, it's not external deploy. It's interface deploy, possibly. I don't know if that's general enough.
But in our case, we are talking about the cloud, right? It's deploying it to the cloud.
Yeah, but I think we want to deal with a mail receiver case, which is deploying it kind of to the cloud, right? It's deploying it to an external service that is connected to the cloud, that's part of your system servers list. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's not actually, I mean, conceptually, you know, does it live in the same data center? Probably, not necessarily. Is it part of a private cloud? Probably. Not necessarily. You might have set your system servers list to have your, you know, this functionality handled in your private cloud, this other functionality handled centrally, etc. Make sense?
Right. But yeah, this service deploy is different, right? It's not.
Okay. Can
linked
you
to
guys
cloud
go, Brady?
in the-
Can you go chase down? I think that is probably a Christian production.
Sure.
Yeah, Fahim
chase
too.
down what
Copy
they did.
Fahim. I know Fahim was involved as well.
Okay.
Right. And probably that's not what we can use, but it is something like that we want to use. I mean, it's a, you know, what it really is more like an endpoint deploy, but that's kind of an ugly name. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'll try and figure this out.
Right. I mean, I could imagine like cloud service deploy for,
Possible.
yeah.
That's possible. That is possible. That is a possible name. Yeah, I agree. That's a reasonable possibility. All right. So okay. So, but the basic result, whatever this is, cloud service deploy, it's going to return an association, or maybe a cloud service deployment object or something. I'm not sure. A cloud service object. Actually, that's an interesting idea. Just as we have a cloud object, we could have a cloud service object. That's actually an interesting idea that can have multiple tentacles that you can connect to. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And then it's symmetrical. It's cloud deploy gives you a cloud object. Cloud service deploy gives you a cloud service object. And a cloud service object has, you know,
almost always an element of it will be a cloud object.
Right. And also a cloud service object, unlike a, yeah, you see, here's what we've got to do. A cloud deploy has a permissions, you know, has a single permissions. A cloud service deploy has a more complicated permission structure, because you may want to say, I want this group of teachers, you know, this group of professors and TAs to have access to this, and this group of students to have access to that, and so on. Does that make sense? And for example, I might even have, you know, a registrar who has access to some completely different set of permissions. Right. So it has a more complicated permission structure.
And one thing that we need to say is acceptable in the case in this for it to work for this case is the cloud service object is not necessarily retrievable from the cloud at a later date. Right? There's post-processing that happens in cloud service deploy.
That does, what do you mean it isn't retrievable? I mean, there's got to be a management interface, like delete object has to be possible.
Right. You can, yeah, sure. You can delete, but I'm saying, so like what we have in QuestionDeploy right now returns this marked up question object, the modified question object, right? You might not be able to reproduce that modified question object just starting from knowing where the cloud object was deployed. It may not be possible.
Okay. Well, so it's stored as another element. I mean,
Yeah, right.
The cloud service.
But like with a cloud object, a cloud object is a cloud object is a cloud object. If you know the URL, you can retrieve the whole thing and it's all good. In this case, there's a state in the returned object that's important to track, potentially.
Right. Okay, I think I get that. But okay, look, I think we have a path forward, and I think it's a pretty good path. And please talk to the cloud object team about how this would work for mail receiver. Okay. Harry on our live stream suggests remote deploy. That won't work because we have a whole bunch of remote evaluate things, and remote deploy will be similar to local deploy, and it'll be a way of putting, we don't have it yet, but just like local deploy is a way of putting, we will be able to deploy certain APIs that run against WSTP server on a local computer as opposed to against a cloud, creating essentially a local API rather than a cloud API. So I would expect that to do the same thing for a remote device.
Maybe scheduled task might benefit from this as well.
Yes, it might.
We still have
That's
task
another
objects,
hack.
right? We still have a task object. That's still a thing, right? That
It absolutely is.
yeah,
task
yeah.
object, but the fact is,
So you could get this
returned,
cloud object or the task object, which would be really useful.
that would be really useful. Right. Good. I knew we needed such a framework. This is a good scheme. Okay. So let's, I mean, that's yet a separate group of people that deal with the tasks.
So yeah, so that means
Okay.
that means Brady, make sure Dylan B is on whatever you send out.
Okay. Disable reassessment we just discussed. That's max. What did we call it?
Max assessments.
I have it up here.
No, it was not max
Tries or
assessment. Max submissions.
guesses.
Max submissions.
Max submissions, yeah.
I'm sorry, I haven't been taking notes here. I should.
And it needs to have a dollar setting as well. And we need to know all the use cases and make sure we can support them. And in the selector, put e.g. file no exam, etc.
Well, that's a different thing for the whole object. Okay. All right. Give target answer. What is this?
So in the assessment result object, do we want to include stuff that might tell the user what the right answer is, or do we want to hide it? Right. Both are reasonable use cases, right?
What's the right answer? What are you saying? What?
So
it says enter the answer here, and then it has underneath the answer is 2. I'm
right.
confused.
You might want to fully explain to people why they got something wrong, right? And say, well, the right answer was broccoli, and you said cauliflower, and here's why it's wrong. Or you might not want to tell them any of that. You might just want to say cauliflower's wrong.
No, I understand.
Is
Okay,
that just a specific case of explanation?
I would have
Where
thought
it might
so.
be some text that says the reason why it's 2 is this, or it might just say the answer was 2.
Explanation are automatic or something.
Right. But there's also interface reasons why you want the computable form of the correct answer, right? If imagine you're clicking on a map and you want to show an X of the correct answer and an X where they
Fair
were,
enough.
right?
I don't know what give target answer is not a best name, but
I
don't know what the complete constellation of those names is. Let's not look at that right now. But I agree that this is a useful piece of functionality. Do you need a name right now? I mean, use give target answer for now.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a string right now. We don't need to document. We can leave it in as a string and change it later.
Okay. Okay, this is what we've already discussed, right?
We already talked about, yeah.
Okay, form panel. What is this?
This is similar to what QuestionObject is going to do, but without with where the user specifies all of the markup rules, where it's not coming from an assessment function. Sort of a low level thing where you can say like a form object or form page.
Well, that's the thing I was saying earlier, that this whole elaborate thing that you've got going wherever it was, where was it? This whole elaborate thing that you've got here, this is something we should be able to provide in any form related system setup, right? Is this what you're talking about here?
Well, there's one for just specifying there's 2 parts to it. There's specifying the interface.
No, I'm talking about this part, the interface part. Yeah.
Yes. So specifying the interface, we think, we were going to call it, have a symbol called question interface. We're talking about renaming that something more generic. But then there's also a tool where you can where it's a dynamic object with that self annotates.
Okay, that sounds like a user interface element. Please talk to those people, Lou or somebody.
Right.
That.
Yeah. I think that is. We need somebody from that group to be part of that conversation, or even do the implementation.
Right. But how that gets unraveled, you've got two different things. One is a dynamic object that stores its state as like, slider of X, slider of dynamic of X is taking the dynamic value of X and using that to display the slider, right? And the second case, which we didn't build in the original UI build out 20 years ago, was the case which is effectively used in forms and to some extent to manipulate, is the non-dynamic form of just referring to a slider. You see what I'm saying? Where something else is going to hydrate the slider, right? In the way of doing it through the dynamic system, right? The slider is hydrated by its argument, right? From the inside. Does this make sense?
Right. That is not what we spec'd out for form panel.
I understand. So you've got two different versions of this. You've got hydrate from the inside, slider of dynamic of X, and you've got hydrate from the outside, as in you've got something which says the form control arrow slider, and something completely different is going to bring that to life. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. The external hydration mechanism we discussed for form panel is when you click the submit button, it regenerates itself based on what you've done.
Well, but that's not. But you see yes. But the thing is, the main thing is, as you move in slider of dynamic of X, as you move the slider, it changes the value of X.
Right.
Right. This is something different. This is a thing where you're describing the interface, but it's a one-shot thing where you set the interface up and then you say, press go. See what I'm saying? So it's not a dynamic interface in the same way.
Are you talking about question object or form panel? Question interface or form panel?
Both of them. I mean, all of them. The things that, look, what happens inside a form object is the same thing.
Yeah, what we spec'd out for form panel was not a one-shot thing. It didn't have that dynamic variable backing.
Okay.
But
look, this conversation needs to have the
right. We've already had this conversation. Yeah, okay. But okay.
try to get these people to define. We want a close analog between the dynamic version and the non-dynamic version. Okay. Probably the same functions, and we have that to some extent to manipulate.
Yeah. And we have notes from another meeting where we spec'd out form panel more fully, but I didn't put them in here.
Okay. Anything else that we need to go over here? What's this?
So this is like the content that will go into that new doc page form, right? This is sort of just keeping track of stuff.
I am supposed to go to another meeting, which is another live stream about logic programming. So
we've definitely accomplished enough to not keep you from another meeting.
Okay. And maybe I even get something to eat for a minute beforehand. Okay.